In this wood turning video, I will show you how not to work with resin, especially if you're just starting out. Welcome back to my channel. My name is David, and without any further ado, let's get making. For this project, I will be using a red mallee burl from Australia. This giant burl cap looks absolutely amazing, but we will give a little bit more color to it. But before we do that, I will just cut the shape to fit my mold on the bandsaw. And this is just a small representation of my normal eggs compared to the blank which we are preparing to paint. So for this application, I'm using 30 minutes epoxy resin. It works really well for such application. I previously tried to use UV resin, but for some reason it wasn't settling well. It wasn't curing, even though I used UV lights. So this technique worked really well so far for me. So I'm sticking with 30 minutes resin. Little drizzle of resin all over the burl. And then with the brush, we can just nicely spread the resin all over the burl, so we have a nice even cover ready for the next step. And the next step will involve adding some metallic pigments to really give some sparkly looking finish to this piece. I'm just using a brush, dip it into the powder and gently tapping on the brush, nicely evenly covering the entire piece. And then adding a little bit of a blue as well, since the silver color very much covered the bottom. Therefore, I just wanted to bring out the blue color a little bit more. And once the resin is fully cured, I will just rough the surface a little bit with a 80 grit sandpaper before we can move on to mixing up some resin. So here I'm just adding a piece of MDF sheet to the bottom of this piece, and this will become more important at the later stage, so I will cover at the end of the video why exactly I did that. And now we are ready to mix our deep pour resin, and for this casting I will be using a different type from Vista. Previously I've been using Vista Ocean, and this one is Vista Mariana, which is even for a deeper casting, specially formulated for resin tables, as it can handle large volume a lot better. Recommendation is up to 7.5 centimeter, and now I will stretch this to all the way to almost 15 centimeter, which is about 6 inch. Doubling the casting depth was just one of the key rules I broke in this project. And the second rule will be all about temperatures. So when it comes to optimal temperature, working with resin is around 22-21 Celsius or around 70 Fahrenheit. So I decided to do this project at a very late night when the temperature already dropped both outside and both in a workshop. So we are currently tracking around 8 Celsius or around 46 Fahrenheit in the workshop. And normally when I do any casting, once the pressure pot is filled, I will take this inside the house and let it cure overnight in room temperature. But with this project, I decided to keep this outside and let it cure around 8 Celsius or 46 Fahrenheit and let it cure for more than 2 days. And once I opened the pressure pot, this is what I found. For me, this was an overwhelming success since the piece came out crystal clear. Yes, we do have some sort of exothermic reaction at the sides, but considering what I'm going to turn this into, that will be turned away anyway. But the overall casting turned out really nice with no cracks, no bubbles. So let's see. And here we are, a little transition into the new workshop. And this is partially I sound like Darth Vader because it's so cold in the workshop since I haven't really got a source of heating at the moment. So I have been working around 10 degrees Celsius over the past few days and I'm struggling with cold at the moment. I was a little hesitant, should I use a waste block with my 5 minutes epoxy resin or should I use a different kind of method to secure this onto my lathes, but I really trust this 5 minutes epoxy resin, so I decided to go with my usual way of mounting this piece, even though this casting is definitely on the larger side, and it worked really well. As you can see, the piece is fairly off-centered at the top. This only means you just need to take time and gently carve the piece until you run completely through. And as always, I'm using my negative rake scraper bit, which works just perfect on any hybrid project. And when you see the nice big thick white ribbons, you know your piece is getting into a good shape. And since there is so many dragon eggs already on YouTube, and I also put some dragon eggs videos out on YouTube, I decided to call this something differently. So this is why I decided to call it a chicken egg. And I think it was just so cool to put a chicken egg into the thumbnail just to kind of represent the size of that huge burl as well. So hope no people get offended. And as I mentioned earlier, I used a little MDF scrap wood at the bottom of this piece. And this technique just allows me to save a little bit of a material. In this case, is a very valuable mallee burl. As I'm shaping this into an egg shape and narrow it down the bottom, I can really utilize the full length or the full height of the burl rather than wasting some key materials. Also, when I'm parting this off and removing the piece from the waste block, I can just easily part off the MDF rather than eating into the nicer wood. Hope that makes sense. If not, you will see in a minute. Once I removed the tailstock support, I had a little bit of a vibration. Again, this is a massive piece on the lathes. This only means I just need to take a little bit more time on a more aggressive sandpaper, which is, I started off on 120 grits. It takes a little bit more time to make sure that we have a nice and smooth finish, but nothing really concerning. Anyway, I love sanding. Between each grit, I will then use some water to nicely clean and remove all the dust particles, and then I can move on to using another grit. I'm also using a very good technique here. One grit, I will use my orbiter sander, and with the second grit, I will go with straight lines. And with a little bit of light, checking all the leftover marks from the previous grits, I can really identify if there is any more work to do on one grit before I can move on to the second grit. Since it is easier to identify straight lines and comparing to the orbiter lines, if that makes sense. After sanding, we are off to do some polishing, and here, oops, I went a little too heavy-handed. You definitely don't need that much polishing. since the piece is pretty much done and now we can work on removing from the lathe, I will be covering the piece with soft cloth, so hopefully if anything happens or goes wrong, the piece will be protected. And trust me, this can be a lifesaver. Or maybe not life, but definitely can help you to save your project. And then the nerve-wracking moment, parting of the piece, I normally just core it a little bit, and then I can just switch over to my hand saw, while I can also support with my other hand the piece, so it's definitely a safe way of removing from your lathe. Drilling the hole for my branding coin, and this also helps to remove some of the inner material, and it just means less material to sand off. And I'm using my chisel to kind of chip out some of the other leftover resin before I can move on to do some more sanding. So thank you for watching. This is certainly one of my biggest chicken dragon hybrid egg. Hope you enjoyed this project video and see you back next week. Oh, and also check out my website since I have some new items uploaded. Link below, down in the description.